All right, welcome back to DC Decoded, where we break down what happens when artificial intelligence meets the nation's capital. We are under the GenAI Collective, a nonprofit started in SF and now has chapters worldwide, where we bring together AI practitioners in the region. I'm Sam Lee. I'm the host of DC Decoded and the creative director of our DC chapter. Under DC Decoded, we do podcast episodes like these. We also put out news roundups on a consistent basis about what's happening in DC and with our community group, and also fun Substack lives. We just put one out yesterday at the time of recording. Sometimes the timelines can get mixed up, but that was really fun with Anna and Catherine. But today we'll be talking about a piece that should be either going out with this episode or has already gone out, and it's in partnership with Atlas. So I have with us Austin, who's going to tell us a bit more about himself and Atlas, and then we'll talk everything AI. So Austin, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and thank you, Sam, for letting me join this very prestigious organization. Just a little bit of an intro. My name is Austin Ellison. I am similarly a graduate from Georgetown University, where I studied international history with a mix of Chinese politics on the side. While I was there, I was very much so focused and very into international affairs, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. Fast forward a little bit after graduation, I did not get into that type of job. And I realized to kind of stay in contact with that side of my interest, I needed to chase it. So this led me to both start writing a lot, reading a lot, but also founding Atlas. And to get a little bit into what the founding statement, founding idea of Atlas is I realized as I was writing and as I was reading articles, what I was really drawn to was this idea or were ideas that were very innovative and novel and challenged, traditional incumbent ideas that hold sway. And this kind of goes back to what I learned in history, which is, everything's fake. Everything is created by someone, by some individual that's basically similar to us. And yet it holds a sort of legitimacy in our eyes because it is. So really what I want to get out with Atlas first is just a position to platform both mine and other people's ideas, where it's harder to get onto other journals, but also to try to platform anything that really is thought provoking, innovative, and hopefully inspires people to change the world.
Awesome. And you can find Atlas, ATLAS, on Substack, as well as DC Decoded. I assume if you are listening to this, you probably have a Substack account, so please go check Atlas out. And Austin reached out to me to write a piece for Atlas, and it was a great opportunity. And at first, I didn't really know what to write, but I figured it out, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about how AI is disrupting the job force, particularly for young people like us. So on that positive note, I approached my piece by thinking about what new innovative ideas I could contribute. And I really thought about the past podcast episodes that we've done on DC Decoded. We have so far put out 8 episodes this year and many more to come. But what is unique about DC Decoded and the cacophony of AI podcasts is that we really focus on DC talent. And I wouldn't have started this podcast if I felt like we were just copying another podcast. But I really have not found a podcast that not just covers policy in AI or business in AI, but anything DC related with AI. And that is what we're trying to achieve at the collective as well. And as I was thinking more about that, I have had great conversations with startups in particular. Some episodes have included startups for DC Decoded, including Trustable, Imara, a couple more to come. And as I was thinking, I was realizing that in the general responsible AI discourse, there's not a lot of mentioning about startups because I think inherently people think startups are risky, they're volatile, they more often don't work than work. But I think all of that taken in stride, I have been talking to some really cool DC startups that were enacting responsible AI platforms, and I just thought that they deserved a bigger slice of the attention. So that's how the piece of how should businesses pursue responsible AI look to startups originated. And it culminated with this thesis of I think that each organization needs its own definition of responsible AI, and they should look more to startups, not solely, but more than they probably currently are. Austin, what were your initial thoughts when we talked about this piece before I even started writing it? But curious to hear your initial thoughts. Did you think it was a good idea, bad idea? And please be as candid as you want.
Well, obviously, I think it was a great idea, as I will be publishing it soon. And I don't want to steal too much from your great piece, so people actually will go and read it after this. But I think one of the biggest things that stood out to me is, like you said, is focusing on this DC community of AI startups. One of the things that you'll see from that, and you know a lot more than me, but is the fact that responsible AI is likely a much bigger priority and much bigger consideration to these companies because they're in, the seat of politics, the seat of regulation, the seat of all this considerations of how to do something responsibly. But I think your article takes it a step further, and where I find it super interesting is the fact that, when we think about responsible AI, we're always thinking about, politics, and that's why, is because it's the seat of where this regulation comes from. Or we're thinking about big tech because, they're the ones leading all of this in terms of when you hear something about AI, most of the time you're hearing about Meta or you're hearing about OpenAI, and they're the ones who are expecting to really push the buck in terms of what responsible AI is. But what your piece kind of makes the argument, and what I find really compelling about it, is that every business eventually will, and increasingly now, will be incorporating AI, and in a way that is making every business an AI company, whether they imagine it or not. And so every business will need to have some sort of responsible AI policy, not just for itself, but also, as we'll increasingly see, for any everyday person. What they will engage with in terms of AI won't be the government. It won't be big tech mostly. It will likely be just your everyday business, either the employees or people using it. And so really trying to find how a business can achieve and what that even means in terms of responsible AI. I think your piece is super interesting in that regard.
Yeah, and I realized very early on that in my conversations with the podcast, and even we were talking about it, it was important to have my own definition of AI, especially for this article, because even though there is a technical definition, AI just means so many different things in different contexts. And for this article, we're defining artificial intelligence as automated systems that can learn from data, adapt to new inputs, and perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. And then a few sentences below that, we just define responsible AI as using AI well. And that actually led to the next section of like, well, what the I probably shouldn't swear. I've only sworn a few times on this podcast, and I'm still not sure how that's playing out. So, what does that even
Mm,
mean? What does well mean? And something that we had been talking about as I was writing and you were editing is that in a McKinsey study released last month, we found out that 13% of respondents in this big like organizational survey said that they, as an organization, have hired AI compliance specialists. That's 13%, and that 6% report hiring AI ethics specialists. And when I first saw those numbers, I was like, small, but that's very small and
mm,
not very useful. But then, like, making the connection between the actual role, like, growing up, would have never thought that these two roles would have existed as a
mhm.
AI compliance specialist or AI ethics specialist. And it's probably only going to grow. So curious to get your thoughts, Austin. What did you think when you saw those numbers, those roles, and how do you think they're going to keep growing and integrating into companies?
Yeah, well, I think I had a very similar first and then second reaction to you, where you first
Right?
read it and you're like, oh, 13, 6, okay, that's not a lot. And in any way, I think people even see that's worrying that these companies don't have it. Then you
Yeah.
think about it, and you get into the article of this idea of like a legacy business versus the nimbleness and agility of a startup, and the fact that now, we're what I think it was 2022 that OpenAI released ChatGPT, and the world really became aware that AI had this potential. we're 3 years out and it's already 13 or 6 to 13% of companies have a dedicated AI ethics person. That is
Yeah.
pretty amazing of a stat. And I think it'll only grow as companies are just now beginning to integrate it. Um, in terms of, what this definition of responsible AI means, I think another interesting thing you discuss in here is in the section right after, it's what do we currently see responsible AI and how are companies currently working on that? And you break it into academically. You go through the Stanford AI Index, going through risk assessment frameworks and transparency benchmarks. You go through publicly, which are, all these different regulations, and you go through privately and you talk about big tech. The question is here is what are we expecting legacy businesses to have in terms of responsible AI? Are we expecting a company like, I don't know, UPS to have a
Yeah.
risk assessment framework or a transparency benchmark? Are we expecting every company to have something similar to that level? Um, but I think your article makes almost the point that it might become necessary to at some level to know how companies are integrating it. And the fear on top of that, as you know earlier in the article, is that a lot of the times, especially now, companies don't even know it's being used. It'll be employees without even managers knowing. Um, and that is the big question of your article is what is responsible AI? All these different fields defined in different ways. And then how can we actually see it happen with these larger companies?
And that dynamic of, I think it was like the high 70s of some companies where their workers were using AI either unbeknownst to company leadership or in
Mhm.
certain ways not known. That's the same exact dynamic as students cheating with ChatGPT and teachers like not really knowing. And
Right.
there was a recent Wired podcast on Uncanny Valley is the name of their podcast, where they differentiate how if you use ChatGPT, if it would be cheating or not. Basically, like if you're not critically thinking using it, then that could be qualified as cheating. And that's what we should focus on, not just stopping the use of AI. So it's a dynamic that is not limited to just knowledge workers, but it's also the younger generations, which we will get a little bit more into. And just to plug the podcast a little bit more, DC Decoded, if you want to learn more about the Stanford AI Index report, I cover that with um, two guests in, I want to say, episode 7. If you want to learn more about the NIST cybersecurity framework or EU Artificial Intelligence Act, that's covered in episode 2. And if you want to learn more about what major tech companies have been doing with trust and safety and responsible AI in the past, that's episode 4. So feel free to check that out. Okay, so let's get to the actual argument now. We have set it up very well. We have, I think, embodied that Einstein quote of if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes on the problem. At this point, I doubt he even said it. I'm sure it was just attributed to him at some point.
Mhm.
No disrespect, Einstein. But we talk about the startups. So it's not that I think big tech companies or big government entities don't have a space in responsible AI. It also wouldn't matter if I didn't think that because they're going to anyways. And that makes sense. They have been the traditional leaders. But I do think startups in particular aren't getting as much credit for the innovative solutions that they're coming up with. This ranges from like very mature startups like Notion, which is a productivity software. Notion's been collaborating with other institutions like the Harvard Business Review to publish what I think is very timely, responsible AI research. Most notably, assessing if your company is AI curious to AI driven and all of those benchmarks. But then when I'm interviewing DC startups like Imara, Trustable, who are really thinking about customer needs at an organizational level, organization by organization, and then designing not only specific responsible AI products, whether that's platforms, codes, and other technical needs, but also creating templates that just apply to a specific type of organization. And that is what I wanted to posit in the article. There's a lot more I could have said, but I wanted to keep it clean as possible. But that was what I was trying to get across with startups that specifically focus on responsible AI platforms and making that into a business model. So, Austin, what were your thoughts when you were cleaning this up, which it did need a lot of cleanup, and I appreciate that. But what were your thoughts on the overall startup section?
Yeah, I think it presents a very interesting dichotomy in terms of considering this issue. In terms of if you look at it from one angle, all these legacy businesses, they will have likely the capital, the resources to fully implement these AI systems into their business. And so the question is, even though they might be slower, they'll have the resources to hire that AI ethics person, or they'll have the
Yeah,
resources to really, to engage with these big tech companies. But I think a different thing that we're thinking about, and this is something we'll discuss later in terms of what AI is making possible. But from a lot of what I've listened to and a lot of people I've talked to, the next kind of generation of what we'll be seeing from AI, the next wave, will be these AI wraps, which will be taking these big LLM models such as ChatGPT, such as Llama from Meta, and it'll be making them into applications that anyone can use, anyone can create. And I think what you're right here is this is where we'll see the most trial and error. Um, in terms of, I think people are smart. They know when someone's being genuine with them, and they know when someone's not being genuine with them. And I think that's even the more so in AI. You can very easily tell when someone AIs a sentence, or I think there's just something with RFK Jr. where there's like a hallucination in one of his policies he just put forward, and
I
it
remember
very
that.
stands out. So these startups that will increasingly only pop up, the ones that find ways to use AI responsibly and to create frameworks that are engaging and trusting by the community, I think will only stand out more, like you've noted in your article. And that's what big companies and legacy companies will be able to draw upon. And I think it will need to balance that barrier between, as I was speaking, I was thinking, in terms of if we want these risk assessment frameworks, if we want these transparency benchmarks, it needs to be somewhere between, you know, people understanding it and what we have now with, if you try to download an app or to do something and you get this long legal thing that, no one reads, you scroll through and you say, yes, I agree, and go. We need something that, because if that's what it eventually becomes, will that really change anything is the question. So I think exactly what you're saying, startups, this much more nimbleness, but also much more closer to people and engaging with people is where we'll see it.
Right. And that article is titled How Should Businesses Pursue Responsible AI? Look to Startups. It will be in the show description, and we aim to put it out on Monday, which is June 2nd. So, again, hopefully it's already out if we've done our jobs well. Let's
Mhm.
shift to something that's really been on my mind and in the news this week, the last week of May. Time Magazine reported this, but plenty of news sources have also been on this beat. But on Wednesday, May 28th, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei declared that AI could eliminate up to half of all entry-level white-collar jobs within 5 years. And the article continues to talk about how last week a senior LinkedIn executive reported that AI is already starting to take jobs from new grads. Going back a little further, in April, Fiverr CEO, which is a freelance agency, said that AI is coming for your job. And this wasn't like a one-on-one employee email. This was an all-staff email. So he really meant everybody, including himself. And even the new pope is warning about AI's dramatic potential to reshape our economy. And reading this as a young professional, it doesn't feel great. Let me put it that way first. But I also think, in lieu of the article, it really made me think about, okay, I think one of the most obvious consequences of AI continuing to be further integrated into companies and organizations of all sides is what that means for the workers, especially more of the entry level professionals. So I've been sending Austin articles for the past few days. I'm curious to get your initial thoughts on with specifically Amode's comment, but in general, the idea that AI is drastically shifting the amount of entry level white collar jobs.
Yeah, I mean it is a terrifying stat, and I'm sure if I received an email like that from my boss, it would shake me to my core. I'm not sure that's a very nice email, but maybe it's nice to tell them that. Um, in terms of this stat, I think the first thing we need to consider with it is whether it's a dystopian, prediction or how accurate it is. And I think one of the things that's most honestly worrying in this field is how little is known. Little is sure that, well, first of all, even experts are disagreeing. There's some people who are saying this is 1 year, there's some people who are saying this is 5 years, and some people saying, well, that's not actually going to happen. And if the experts who are day to day working in machine learning, have a PhD in this don't know, how can the everyday person know? But I think at least widely people agree, like you said, within a short amount of time, maybe 5 to 10 years, at least artificial intelligence will rapidly automate stuff, and soon enough, artificial general intelligence, which is where AI becomes smarter than human and more capable than human in any regard, will happen. And I think you're right. There is that serious threat and serious fear of these entry level jobs being completely automated, because that is what entry level workers are given. They're given the jobs that no one wants to do. They're given the busy work. They're given the copy paste. They're given something that AI, even right now, can do very easily. And so I think there's two things that I really feel hearing about this. One, in a way, I welcome it. In a very, very maybe pessimistic way, I welcome it. Yeah, in that, no one wants to do these types of jobs. No one wants to copy paste something for 5 hours, and no one wants to look up names. And I think about that a lot. I don't know if you do, but I work an entry level job, and a lot of it I hate. And so some part of me thinks if AI is able to do this, that'd be wonderful. And the second part to think about that is the CTO of Microsoft. I read something through him through Semaphore recently, and they were actually saying rather than huge layoffs, what they think will lead to them is they might actually need new software engineers. They might need to hire more people, and that's surprising coming from software engineers, because that's what people think will be the first to go. Are people who code, because that's what AI does best currently, is coding. But what they're saying is that really it what is being destroyed is the current jobs. But what that means is that the jobs will actually be shifted to different skill sets. And it's both a good and a bad thing. The good thing is that the skill sets are hopefully better for people. The skill sets are more creativity, are more being able to manage, or more being able to whatever you think of, you can now do, because AI it can code, it can create images, it can do everything. We'll see whether it happens, but I'm probably going to create the image for this article using AI.
Right.
The good thing about that is hopefully life will be better after that. The bad thing is will people, and we're getting to this, be able to do that? Do we have the current institutions and training right now to get there? I don't think we do, and I think you would also agree. I want to hear your thoughts after this, but I don't think you agree either. We're seeing in universities that it's, like you said, seen as cheating. It's seen as a threat to learning. And in many ways, it is a threat to learning, but in other ways, it's a real boon and a real benefit. And I'll end with, I think it's telling that stat that 70% of employees use AI without their bosses knowing. Because actually, in one way, I think AI integration into the workplace won't be a top-down thing. It will be these new employees, the youngest entry-level people, bringing it and innovating it into the job. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is this really distinct paradox here where for young professionals specifically, at this point, you pretty much need to have some working level of AI and above to advance. But at the same time, it's the advancing AI models that are destroying what are the conventional entry level jobs. So it's definitely a chicken and the egg situation where how are you supposed to advance if we're breaking the career ladder at the bottom? The GenAI Collective's founding director, Catherine McMillan, has written about this. I'll link it in the show description, but she articulates that point and draws it out. I would just say that when I was doing the job search and me and Austin, we just graduated just over a year ago, it very much felt that way. I mean, it wasn't like I woke up every day and I was like, well, like AI has probably taken five more jobs that I could have taken. But it took a really long time. I was applying from August 2023 to June 2024. And if you think about it, that's a lot of mornings to wake up where, especially where a lot of your friends already have their entry level job secured, those are a lot of days to wake up and feel like you are falling behind, even if you objectively aren't. And I imagine it's only been harder for a class of 2025. I actually don't just imagine that. I've seen the stats as well on that. But yeah, I think it's making that squeeze for senior year of undergrad especially hard because I think from what I've seen, it's not like these new classes of like class of 2024, 25, 26. It's not like anything has really significantly changed yet in terms of our velocity of applying or trying the same methods as even the classes of 2022 or 2023. It's just that the jobs are both disappearing fast, but also shifting really fast as well. And I feel like I've had to, like, I love where I currently work. Maybe that's where me and Austin currently might disagree. And I hope Austin can join me in the love category soon enough. But it took a lot to find it, and it's not a conventional place. I really love it, but it's not like if I had gotten an earlier offer, who knows? Maybe I would have just gone with that because of the perceived security. So I think that's the point of how higher ed needs to be changed. And it's really unfortunate that the way that the current administration is going about things, I actually think that they're starting from a correct premise that there's a lot of reform needed for how especially college students are educated or what we are paying so many thousands of dollars. Our parents are paying so many thousands of dollars for, but it's because the administration is doing it in such brash ways that some of the supporters really like, but a lot of us, including my organization, like caution against because there needs to be process. So on that note, I'm curious, like Austin, if you were designing your class or a curriculum, like what let's just take our university, for example, since we know well, like what can our university do to help, especially seniors, be more equipped to get jobs at hopefully a comparable rate as, preceding classes?
That's a great question. It's
Easy question, right? Easy.
yeah, you said you wanted me to be innovative in my answers, and so this will require it.
I
I
did I
guess
did tell Austin before this like he should try to say something original. So I hope that was the right amount of pressure, but go ahead.
right. I've been racking my brain this whole discussion. I guess I'll start with saying I was in the exact same spot. It took me maybe 2 to 3 months to get even like a first interview. And it definitely to know it's getting worse than that is terrifying. I think, there's this dual way of seeing AI. And I think the first way is a very optimistic way in terms of AI is potential. AI is revolutionary, limitless potential in terms of whatever you can think of, you can do. And that's the hope. That's what when you're listening to Sam Altman speak, that's what all these big tech leaders and visionaries are saying. But it does sound very hollow, when you're thinking about
Yeah.
the people who are graduating now who don't know what's going on. And it makes people worry. It makes me worry that we are going to see almost a lost generation type of aspect where you have people who are currently in power who are there thinking about, the CEO or manager level of a company. They already have their foot in the door. And we just talked about how it only get harder for people to have their foot in the door. But now especially if universities don't figure out a way to teach this, you can see these people just kind of get passed along, get passed up. And so if I had to say in terms of what our university or any university should do, I think the thing would be is just to integrate AI as much as possible into everything within the curriculum. That means partially teaching the professors how to use it, but more importantly, I think it's teaching students how to really, it goes not to self-promote, but it goes very well with my journal's kind of theme in terms of being novel, innovative, and breaking the now, but teaching students how to think beyond what exists. And to go along with this, I heard from one person saying that the average age of, in terms of a founder of a unicorn company, which is like, I think $1 trillion in value, used to be maybe 10 years ago, 30 to 40 years old. And that would be with, it'd be a small company, but it'd be at least like 10, 20 people. Now, this person was saying that they were engaging with the average unicorn founder in terms of 20 years old, in college already, just
Yeah.
sitting there with their computer, creating something that will change the world. It's so valued, it's a unicorn company, $1 trillion. And so I think where we're getting here is one, teaching thinking rather than teaching very, very um very regimented skills, like coding. What's more important is still having coding knowledge, but being able to think and imagine. Um and but more importantly than that, I think also thinking outside the box. One of the things I think that'd be most interesting with that is thinking in terms of Georgetown. It's known as a foreign service school. There's other degrees, there's worse degrees, but it's known as a foreign service school. And something I was really interested with, and actually constituted the first article that I launched Atlas with, was using AI to create geopolitical reports on every country in Africa. And it's that type of thing of being able to go beyond what you think is possible because of AI, and it's trying to hinge on that optimism of AI and going beyond what is currently is, trying to
Yeah.
recreate institutions, recreate what's possible. It takes a lot of agency, which is the scary part, but it really is true. If it's taught, if universities are able to teach it well in terms of prompts, in terms of being able to implement it in every project, it really is like the sky's the limit.
Yeah, and just on the theme of finding education, it's not limited to institutions. I mean, you're really still only in college for 4 years, and if, in my opinion, you're doing it right, you're not learning in classrooms for all of it or doing homework. Sorry to a person we know who did graduate top of our class, and she did spend a lot of her time doing that. She's amazing. But I think that's something we're trying to do at the collective. We, in the DC chapter, we just did our first Notion Mail event, and it's the first of three that we're doing. So we want to do more educational events about not just AI as a topic and the way we're talking about it now, but actually using products that do use AI and are helpful for especially young professionals who it's a tough time right now for a lot of them, for a lot of us. So I think that is a big theme as well. Like as much reform as higher ed needs, it's also about just finding learning, whether like you do something like Austin where you found Atlas and you invite others to get involved as well, or if it's something like the GenAI Collective or on the work I do with Notion, I think it's also about finding what is interesting to you and just like being better than other people about it or just doing it. Like so many people just say that they plan to do something or once this happens, they can do that. But I guess the scary and exciting thing about AI is that it kind of eliminates that normal time frame and it's just a matter of, I think, trying at this point. Um, and that's theoretically what young professionals do have over older people. It's time. Like we usually are less tied
Mm.
down. We are not usually making enough money to go have big vacations. Or if we are, we don't have the time to do those vacations. I'm sure me and Austin both know people like that. But yeah, it's the time to experiment, like what Austin was saying. Okay, I think that's a lot of ground for one episode. This was covering a new article that's written by me out on Austin's platform, Atlas. That's ATLAS on Substack. And if you're also interested in collaborating with him, writing for him, feel free to reach out to him through Substack as well. The article is How Should Businesses Pursue Responsible AI? And I argue we should look more towards startups, specifically DC startups, the people I've interviewed. So feel free to check that out as well. And this is DC Decoded. We break down what happens when artificial intelligence meets the nation's capital. Be sure to subscribe, leave a rating or review wherever you are listening or watching. If you're on Substack, please consider recommending us. It really helps us reach new audiences. And the links to the article, Catherine's article, Austin's Substack, upcoming events, all will be in the show description, ideally. And until the next episode, which I think might come out in a few days if, again, I'm able to do that. In case the audience cannot tell, I do make a lot of the creative decisions currently for the chapter. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.